Hi everybody, this is Kiefer from DangerouslyHardcore.com, obviously still in Seattle because of the goatee, and here with Joel Jamieson. And I wanted to talk about the huge debate over steady state cardio, which everybody knows I hate steady state cardio, and I argue against it all the time, but those are for goals of fitness, aesthetics, and some types of performance, not all types of performance. So Joel, essentially, like I said in an article recently, you're in favor of steady state cardio. I hate it, therefore I hate you. So let's get this hashed out while we're here.
Sure.
The question I presented you with earlier was, what is the steady state component for? And I threw some beta oxidation stuff and questions at you that you actually had an entirely different reason for why you introduce these longer steady state components.
Sure. Like we talked about before, I think if we look at the entire spectrum of volume, intensity, frequency, all these different variables of training, we find that there's always going to be a trade-off between how hard you train, the intensity, and how much you can do of it, right? If I'm trained at 1 rep max, I can't go in and do that day in, day out without overtraining very quickly, right? So obviously, when our goal is strength and power increases, we use sub-maximal training, right? We do sets of 6, we do sets of 8, we do sets of 10, and that is really even for goals where the goal is to increase 1 rep max. And if we look at the other side of this equation, the endurance equation, or the ability to maintain power, again, we could go train maximum intensity of those things peak, but could we do that every single day without overtraining? Probably not. So for one, you need that lower intensity of work to balance out and to recover from the higher intensity of work that's going to be done. Secondly, I think if we look at a lot of the research, we see that there are, in fact, components that respond towards higher volume training. We see capillary density, right? The ability to deliver the blood flow and the oxygen into working muscles. We see obviously the slow twitch fibers respond much better to longer volumes of training, and the slow twitch fibers do a lot to oxidize and get rid of a lot of stuff produced by the fast twitch fibers. So if we can clear those out faster, we can keep our fast twitch fibers actually producing force for longer, right? Third, what I think we also see and what research has shown is that the heart itself needs volume if you want to stretch the fibers of the heart, and that only happens when you train it for a period of time where the heart is completely filled with blood between each beat, and we start to go above 160 beats per minute, let's say. That actually tends to decrease. Stroke volume will plateau or decrease a little bit. So really, we just see that there's benefits. There's billion pieces of the puzzle, the energy system puzzle, when lower intensity and higher volumes are used. And then thirdly, like I said, look at real world application. We've seen boxers, we've seen wrestlers, we've seen combat athletes in general incorporating this into their training for 50 plus years, right? If we look back at the Alis and the Frasers and some of the best known boxers in history, they all did it, and they were extremely well conditioned. We saw heavyweight boxers at 230, 240 pounds going for 12 to 15 rounds, and they didn't slow down nearly the way we see MMA guys slowing down in one round. So I think it's hard from just a real world standpoint. There must have been something to it because they produced better conditioning than a lot of our top guys are now, and they all did it. So, I think if again, we talked about this, it's not something that everybody should go out there and run miles. I don't advocate that. But I think we do see there are benefits to lower intensity work in general, just like there's benefits to strength training other than 1 rep maxing. There's benefits to 6-8 reps. There's benefits to lower intensity cardiovascular work, and even like we talked about, Charlie Francis trained sprinters, right? He trained Ben Johnson, some of the best sprinters in the world, and he did tempo work was a big component of that at 70%, 75% of speed, and he felt that contributed towards increasing top end speed through different mechanisms. So, I think we don't need to make a blanket prescription that everyone needs to go out and run miles. We've tried that, it doesn't work either. But I think we've seen a little bit too far of the pendulum swing towards away from any of it and all of it for everybody. And there's certain people I think that benefit from it, and there's people that email me literally every day that say, hey, I stopped doing all my lower intensity work, all I did is intervals every day, and my conditioning didn't get better. I started using your stuff, we started doing some more volume, I started doing some lower intensity stuff, and now I feel better, my performance has improved, and I'm in better shape. So I think if we look at all those points together, it makes a pretty good case that it's probably not the end all be all evil of training that a lot of people are making out to be.
I think part of where that argument's coming from to do just HIIT training and get away from all the steady state stuff are the research that shows equivalent end products of either a small amount of HIIT training versus a long amount of steady state. But those are in relatively sedentary populations.
They are.
They're not in athletes.
Well, here's something else that's funny is, I think probably the big one everybody knows of that started the whole kind of, I wouldn't say it started, but fueled it, is the Tabata research,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So if you look at the Tabata research, I want to say there was 7 people in each group total.
Right.
First of all. Second of all, their VO2s started at like 49 or 50, which they were not in good shape by any stretch.
Right.
And thirdly, no one knows this or talks about this, the high intensity Tabata group did something like 30 or 60 minutes a week of low intensity training in the study.
Right.
So
Right.
how exactly are you going to invalidate, any use of lower intensity work when the high intensity group did more total lower intensity work than did higher intensity work in that study?
Right, because when you look at it, that's part of the cycle of the HIIT cycle. There's a low intensity component between each of the sprint cycles.
Well, no, they did an actual day of just low intensity
Oh,
work.
did they?
Yes.
Oh, they did that
They
in
did
the
an
Tabata
actual,
studies,
yes,
too.
they did a day of low intensity training. I can't remember if it was 30 minutes, I'll have to look it up, 30 minutes or 60 minutes, a whole day of 70% steady state work in the study of the HIIT group.
So what was the
exactly.
idea behind that?
Well, the idea behind that was the Tabata study itself was actually more, they were trying to measure a way to quantify the accumulated oxygen deficit.
Okay.
And they were looking more like if we train people only aerobically and we train people anaerobically, does our markers show that this group improved anaerobically and not in this group? Then is it a valid marker?
I see.
So they didn't, the point of the study wasn't necessarily to say steady state versus high intensity.
Right.
That wasn't really the main point, which people have missed. But you literally have a group of high intensity people in that study doing low intensity work, using arguments not to do low intensity work.
Well, you do have, is it Gibbs? There's a researcher
Martin
Gibbs.
Gibala. There's a high intensity guy, Martin Gibala, who I actually ran into.
Yeah, Gibala.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I actually ran into him in a
Oh, you
clinic.
did? Okay.
Yeah, I did. And he had the same discussion, and he said,
because I know, at least in his research, he doesn't mention the low intensity.
that he doesn't. He
component,
tends to not do it. But he and I had the same discussion you and I are having. And he said, flat out, number one, most of our studies are on fairly untrained athletes. Number two, the big question he said in our community as research is what do we do after 6 weeks? Because they recognize that their programs are fairly short-lived in nature and that we need to look at kind of the bigger picture.
Right.
But he actually said that media love headlines, and 2 minutes a day over an hour a day makes a great headline. So I think we've seen that captured and spread. So.
Right.
But
so we'll see where that goes.
People want to do what they want to do. It's just I think we've seen that there's not a reason to abandon any and all lower intensity forms efforts. And if you want to do that, then max out every single day and see how that goes for you. Right?
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, everybody. So if you are interested in Joel's work, and you very much should be because I am, tell us where everybody can find you, Joel.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the main place is just 8weeksout.com. That's really where I post all my articles and videos and have our general discussions. They can also find me at Facebook. Of course, it's Facebook/Joel Jamieson, and Twitter, same thing, just Twitter/Joel Jamieson.
Do you tweet a lot?
I don't tweet a lot, actually. I'm not a big tweeter. I should be. I know a lot of people tweet. But just 8weeksout.com is where they're gonna find everything they need to.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Joel, for letting me use your gym and getting on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for growing the goatee out.